The Gaza Strip, a densely populated Palestinian territory, has once again become the epicenter of a violent conflict. This small strip of land, home to nearly 2 million people, has been a flashpoint for decades, with tensions frequently boiling over into violence. Recent weeks have witnessed a dramatic escalation in hostilities, resulting in a devastating loss of life and widespread destruction. The scale of the damage is immense, with entire neighborhoods reduced to rubble and countless families left homeless. Israeli airstrikes have targeted various locations within Gaza, including residential areas, government buildings, and infrastructure deemed to be used by militant groups. The intensity and frequency of these strikes have left the population in a state of constant fear and uncertainty. Meanwhile, Palestinian militant groups have responded by firing rockets into Israel. These rockets, often indiscriminately launched, have caused damage and casualties in Israeli towns and cities, further escalating the cycle of violence. This latest eruption of violence has brought renewed attention to the intractable Israeli-Palestinian conflict, highlighting the urgent need for a peaceful resolution. Protests and demonstrations have erupted worldwide, with people calling for an end to the bloodshed and a return to dialogue. The recent escalation has resulted in a heavy toll on civilians, with reports of numerous casualties on both sides. Hospitals and emergency services are overwhelmed, struggling to cope with the influx of injured and the sheer scale of the humanitarian crisis. The United Nations has expressed grave concern over the growing number of civilian deaths, including women and children, and the targeting of civilian infrastructure such as hospitals and schools. The international body has called for immediate measures to protect civilians and ensure their safety. The targeting of civilian infrastructure such as hospitals and schools has further exacerbated the humanitarian crisis. These attacks have not only caused immediate harm, but have also disrupted essential services, making it even harder for the population to cope with the ongoing conflict. The indiscriminate nature of the violence has drawn widespread condemnation from the international community, with many calling for an immediate ceasefire to prevent further bloodshed. World leaders have urged both sides to exercise restraint and return to the negotiating table. The situation in Gaza remains extremely volatile, with tensions running high and the potential for further escalation a constant threat. The streets are tense, with a heavy military presence and civilians taking cover during airstrikes, unsure of what the next moment might bring. The international community must act decisively to de-escalate the situation, provide humanitarian assistance to those in need, and work towards a lasting solution to the conflict. Aid organizations are on the ground, but their efforts are hampered by the ongoing violence and access restrictions. The recent escalation in Gaza is a stark reminder of the fragility of peace in the region and the urgent need for a just and lasting solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Only through sustained dialogue and mutual understanding can a peaceful and prosperous future be envisioned for both Israelis and Palestinians. The current conflict between Israelis and Palestinians is deeply rooted in history, stemming from competing claims to the same land. This land, rich in cultural and religious significance, has been a focal point of contention for centuries. Both sides have long-standing historical and religious connections to the region, making the conflict particularly intractable. For Jews, the land is the biblical promised land, while for Palestinians it is their ancestral homeland, where their families have lived for generations. Understanding the historical context is essential for comprehending the complexities of the present situation and the challenges of achieving a peaceful resolution. The layers of history, culture, and politics are deeply intertwined, making any solution difficult to achieve. The origins of the conflict can be traced back to the late 19th century, with the rise of both Zionism, a movement advocating for a Jewish homeland in Palestine, and Palestinian nationalism, which sought self-determination for the Arab population living in the region. These movements grew in response to the decline of the Ottoman Empire and the increasing influence of European powers in the Middle East. The British Mandate for Palestine, established after World War I, further complicated the situation by attempting to balance the aspirations of both Jews and Arabs. The British issued conflicting promises to both groups, leading to increased tensions and outbreaks of violence. The 1948 Arab-Israeli War, which followed the United Nations partition plan for Palestine, resulted in the creation of the State of Israel and the displacement of hundreds of thousands of Palestinians. This event, known as the Nakba or catastrophe by Palestinians, remains a central point of contention and a source of deep-seated grievances. The 1967 Six-Day War led to Israel's occupation of the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and the Gaza Strip, further exacerbating tensions and fueling the conflict. The occupation has had lasting implications, including the establishment of Israeli settlements in these territories, which are considered illegal under international law. The failure to resolve key issues, such as the status of Jerusalem, the right of return for Palestinian refugees, and the expansion of Israeli settlements in the occupied territories, has perpetuated the cycle of violence and mistrust. Efforts at peace, including the Oslo Accords and various international initiatives, have repeatedly stalled or failed. The ongoing conflict has had a profound impact on both Israelis and Palestinians, shaping their identities, narratives, and aspirations. The human cost of the conflict is immense, with countless lives lost and communities disrupted. Despite the challenges, many individuals and groups on both sides continue to work towards peace, driven by the hope for a better future for their children and future generations. The international community has responded to the recent escalation in Gaza with widespread condemnation. Leaders from various countries have voiced their concerns, emphasizing the urgent need for peace and stability in the region, and urgent calls for restraint from both sides. These calls have been echoed by numerous international organizations, including the United Nations, the European Union, and the Arab League, all stressing the importance of de-escalation. Governments and international organizations have expressed deep concern over the loss of civilian life, the targeting of civilian infrastructure, and the rapidly deteriorating humanitarian situation. The images of destroyed homes and displaced families have sparked global outrage and a renewed focus on the need for humanitarian aid. The United Nations Security Council has held multiple emergency meetings to discuss the crisis, but efforts to adopt a joint resolution have been hampered by disagreements among member states. These disagreements often stem from differing political alliances and perspectives on the conflict. Nevertheless, there is a clear consensus within the international community that the violence must stop, and a ceasefire must be established as a matter of urgency. Peace rallies around the world have shown that people everywhere are calling for an end to the bloodshed. Many countries have called on both Israel and Palestinian militant groups to exercise restraint, respect international humanitarian law, and protect civilians. The emphasis on international law highlights the global expectation for both parties to adhere to established norms and conventions. There have also been calls for an independent investigation into alleged war crimes committed by both sides during the conflict. Human rights organizations are pushing for accountability and justice, ensuring that those responsible for violations are held to account. The international community has a crucial role to play in mediating a ceasefire, providing humanitarian assistance to those affected by the conflict, and working towards a just and lasting peace between Israelis and Palestinians. Aid convoys are being organized to deliver essential supplies, and diplomatic efforts are intensifying to bring both sides to the negotiating table. However, the effectiveness of international efforts will depend on the willingness of both sides to engage in good faith and make the necessary compromises to achieve a peaceful resolution. The path to peace is fraught with challenges, but with sustained international pressure and genuine commitment from both parties, a lasting solution can be achieved. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict is often presented as a clash of narratives, with each side holding firmly to its own version of events. To understand the complexities of the conflict and the challenges of achieving peace, it is crucial to engage with both the Israeli and Palestinian perspectives. The Palestinian narrative emphasizes the historical injustices they have faced, beginning with the displacement and dispossession that occurred during the creation of Israel in 1948. Many Palestinians see themselves as victims of an ongoing process of colonization and occupation, their land confiscated, their movements restricted, and their rights denied. The Israeli occupation of the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and the Gaza Strip, which began in 1967, is a particularly contentious issue. Palestinians view the occupation as illegal and oppressive, characterized by military checkpoints, home demolitions, and the expansion of Israeli settlements, which they see as encroaching on their land and undermining the possibility of a future Palestinian state. The Palestinian narrative also highlights the everyday realities of life under occupation, including the lack of freedom of movement, economic hardship, and the constant threat of violence. For many Palestinians, the struggle for self-determination and an end to the occupation are central to their identity and aspirations.